South Korea. How does a country that nearly disappeared from the world map due to losing a war, and was once even poorer than Ethiopia, now be considered a superpower-rich country with immense influence? Apparently, in the 1960s, a South Korean general made an agreement with several of the wealthiest families in South Korea. Since then, in just 40 years, South Korea's economy has grown by 100 times. It turns out those families weren't ordinary. They were a group of families with insane business conglomerates, which are now often referred to by the nickname of Chaebol. Hi, welcome to the darker shade, and in this unreal episode, we will discuss a unique case in South Korea where their country progressed rapidly. This significant progress wasn't due to government leadership, but rather, it was led by their Chaebols. But what exactly are Chaebols? Here, Chaebol essentially means wealthy families, derived from the word chai, meaning money or wealth, and bol meaning clan, tribe, or family. But out of all those Chaebols, there's one company led by this man who repeatedly managed to control the economy, and even his decisions could influence an entire country like South Korea, to the point where the South Korean government often couldn't do much about it. But how can their influence be so strong? BTS, Blackpink, Samsung, LG, maybe those are the names that often come to mind when we mention South Korea, an advanced country always associated with wealth, progress, and beauty. They now also rank first in the world, as the country with the most population buying luxury goods. But what if it turns out that before those Chaebols intervened, South Korea was indeed an extremely poor country? Just how poor was it? Geographically, South Korea should have been poor just based on its size, the infertile land for agriculture, the lack of minerals and other natural resources. It's even noted that they were worse off than some developing countries in Africa. How did that happen? So, in 1910, all of Korea was successfully controlled by Japan, but in 1945, after Japan surrendered and began to leave Korea, Russian or Soviet forces started entering from the north, and American forces also began entering from the south. Both foreign countries began nominating leaders for Korea in line with their respective ideologies. Russia, with its communist ideology, appointed Kim Il-sung, who claimed the northern part of Korea, while America with its capitalist ideology, appointed Syngman Rhee, who claimed the southern part of Korea. However, unfortunately, during Japan's leadership, Japan focused more on developing industries in North Korea due to the greater availability of natural resources there compared to South Korea. So, what South Korea got from their independence was basically just the damaged Japanese infrastructure. Not only that, because of the ideological conflict between North and South Korea in 1950, the Korean War began. This clearly worsened South Korea's situation, to the point where they initially lost territory and were left with very little. But they eventually reclaimed it, thanks to the assistance of America. In essence, from 1950 to 1953, the country of South Korea was completely devastated and impoverished, not only due to external factors, but Syngman Rhee, the leader appointed by America, turned out to be someone dishonest, obsessed with wealth and power. As a result, South Korea's economy, which at that time relied solely on aid from America, ended up in the pockets of Rhee and his associates. But in 1961, seeing the worsening economy of South Korea, a military officer named Park Chung Hee staged a coup, seized control of the country, and installed himself as the new president of the Republic of Korea. Fortunately, Park Chung Hee was a different kind of leader. During the Japanese rule, he was one of the individuals selected to be educated in a Japanese military school, where his education expanded his worldview and made him realize that, like Japan, the key to South Korea's economic progress lay in industrialization. And from that moment on, this general came up with a crazy plan. But little did he realize that his crazy plan would ultimately give birth to a new republic that he had never imagined. Hyundai, LG, Lotte, and SK are the Chaebols that hold the highest influence in Korea. But out of the hundreds of Chaebols in power in Korea, there's one Chaebol whose influence surpasses them all, and that is Samsung. The pride of South Korea and also the largest contributor to its economy. Whoever leads this company is guaranteed to become the most powerful person in Korea, and that title now belongs to this Korean citizen, a 55-year-old man named Lee Jae-young, often referred to as J.Y. Lee, a third-generation member of the Lee family that founded Samsung. But how strong is the influence of this one man in South Korea? The extent of his influence can be demonstrated by his case in 2017 when he was still serving as the vice chairman of Samsung. Essentially, he was arrested and charged for proven bribery of the previous Korean president, Park Chung Hee. He was actually sentenced to 12 years in prison, but due to Samsung's legal team and Jae Lee's strong influence within the South Korean government, he ultimately received only a 5-year prison sentence. He was imprisoned for 1 year, but in 2018, his sentence was revised and suddenly reduced to 2.5 years. What's even more unique is that his new sentence could be postponed, so he was released temporarily to attend to his duties, and only in 2020 was his sentence resumed. But after some time in 2021, the administration of President Joe Biden from America suddenly gathered with other chaebols in South Korea to collectively persuade the South Korean president at the time, Moon Jae-in, to release J.Y. Lee because they claimed he was the only one who could help with the global chip shortage crisis. Seeing the pressure from the chaebols and their allied nations, on August 13, 2021, Moon Jae-in was forced to release J.Y. Lee, but with conditional freedom, where his business activities and access were greatly restricted. However, 1 year later in August 2022, the new president of Korea, Yoon Suk-yeol, suddenly lifted all penalties and granted forgiveness for J.Y. Lee's offenses. He emphasized the importance of Samsung's stability in South Korea's economy, a move that eventually allowed J.Y. Lee to rise and officially become the director of Samsung in October 2022. These situations demonstrate that the power of the chaebols is essentially above the law. But just how significant is the contribution of Samsung and other chaebols to be considered this important? It turns out there is a lot of data showing that these chaebols directly and indirectly contribute 60 to 80% of the GDP or economy in South Korea, with Samsung alone consistently accounting for an average of 20% of the entire South Korean economy. These numbers are quite astonishing because even a giant company like Apple only contributes around 1.5% of the GDP of the United States. But how is it possible for a family-owned company to become this powerful? So, let's go back to 1961 and President Park Chung Hee's crazy plan. With his education in Japan, he was inspired by Japan's economic success. He remembered that Japan's rapid development during the industrialization era in the 1880s was achieved by seeking the help of the zaibatsu, which is essentially the same as chaebol, meaning wealthy clans or families. At that time, Japan also had its own 5 major zaibatsu, such as Mitsubishi, Sumitomo, Nissan, Furukawa, and Kawasaki, whose collaboration with the government successfully boosted Japan's economy, which was lagging far behind the West, and eventually made it one of the feared nations in World War II. Learning from that, Park Chung Hee immediately forged cooperation agreements with several chaebols, one of which was Samsung. The agreement was more or less like this: Park Chung Hee, as the government, will provide subsidies for assets, low-interest loans, low taxes, and other facilities that will facilitate the expansion of business for these chaebols. But in return, these chaebols must increase job opportunities, contribute to the Korean industry, and provide financial support for Park Chung Hee's social, military, and political programs. But why is this plan called a crazy plan? Because unlike Japan, which in the 1960s saw the role of the zaibatsu as completed and more or less took and redistributed the assets and wealth of these zaibatsu to avoid economic monopolies. Now, Park Chung Hee's plan was considered crazy because he seemed not to care much about the monopoly aspect, as long as these chaebols could still support his side. He didn't care how big these chaebols could become and whether they could monopolize the economy. Just imagine, the Samsung Group in South Korea doesn't just have electronics. They also have banks, insurance, securities, shipping, fashion, hospitals, hotels, and even participated in the construction of iconic buildings like the Burj Khalifa and the Petronas Towers in Malaysia alongside Samsung C&T. Here, we can see that these chaebols have ambitions to control all markets, as long as there's no regulation. That's why it's not surprising that they eventually gained control of 60 to 80% of South Korea's economy. And since 1968, in just 50 years, with the expertise of these chaebols, South Korea's economy has seen a staggering 100-fold increase, transforming it from one of the poorest countries into one of the wealthiest in the world. But it's not just the economy that has skyrocketed. It's also the government's dependence on the support of these chaebols for all their political activities. This automatically gives these chaebols significant influence over the politicians they sponsor. However, despite the economic prosperity and improved quality of life brought about by the chaebols' influence, is there a price that the people of South Korea have to pay? The answer is yes, they couldn't fight back. You should know that even the education system in South Korea is visibly tailored to benefit the chaebols. The curriculum is designed to produce super employees for the chaebol companies. It's an educational environment where students rarely ask questions, and they are evaluated more based on what they can memorize from textbooks. There's also a unique culture in Korea where students study incredibly hard in good schools and aspire to get into top universities, all with the ultimate goal of being accepted by one of the chaebol companies. Why? Because the average salary is significantly higher compared to other workplaces. The starting salary gap can be as much as double, not to mention other benefits like bonuses, health insurance, facilities, and more. Furthermore, those who successfully secure a job in a chaebol company are considered successful individuals. In fact, 73% of recent graduates in South Korea initially applied to the top 3 chaebol companies, which are Samsung, Hyundai, and SK. If they get rejected, they move on to apply to other chaebol companies below them. And if they are rejected again, they are often viewed as failures by those around them. They may also opt to apply to smaller companies or start their own businesses. The dilemma of the chaebols in South Korea is that, while they have contributed significantly to the rapid growth of their country, they have also gradually become something possibly larger than the nation itself. Many Koreans are increasingly worried about these chaebols because there are still numerous cases that I haven't been able to cover in a single video. For example, Samsung, since its founding in 1938 by its first leader, Lee Byung-chul, and continued by his son Lee Kun-hee, has been involved in numerous scandals that demonstrate how chaebols often operate above the law. Apart from the crazy scandals involving other chaebols, it's true that chaebols contribute 60 to 80% to the economy. However, it turns out that they only provide 10 to 20% of the job openings. But the bottom line is that the South Korea you see on your screens wouldn't exist without these chaebols, because they are the biggest contributors to the K-pop and K-drama industries. Take Samsung for instance. They sponsor 60% of all the Korean dramas ever made. South Korea might look ideal in K-dramas, but the reality for ordinary Koreans is quite different. Under the influence of chaebols, the level of consumerism there is extremely high, leading to a significant lifestyle gap. One of these cultural aspects is borrowing money to buy branded goods or lead a luxurious lifestyle, which has become quite common. That's one of the reasons why in 2020, someone in South Korea went bankrupt every 12 minutes because they couldn't pay off their debts. So, after understanding the impact of chaebols on the economy and the lives of South Korean citizens, are you still interested in living in South Korea under the leadership of chaebols or wealthy families? Or do you prefer to continue living in your own country? Please share your thoughts in the comments section below. Thanks for watching. See you again in another darker shade.